The other day I was having a fun little chat with a good friend that is a very strong proponent to 7mm. Obviously, I'm a big fan of 30 caliber, and we had a fun little discussion about whether, well, I don't know, 30 caliber is even necessary for a lot of big game hunting, especially elk. That 7mm makes 30 caliber obsolete. That's going to be the discussion today. Now, my friend has a lot of great points. Honestly, you can make very good cases that 7mm is all you ever need for elk. But I also hopefully will have a good little rebuttal in this video of why you might want a 30 caliber. All right, so obviously this debate is caliber specific, 7mm versus 308 caliber. However, I'm going to use real world examples, and we're obviously going to compare cartridges that are going to have similar ballistics to represent 30 caliber. Is my personal hunting load with my 300 Weatherby Magnum. Now this is a 200 grain terminal scent going 3,110 feet per second. The powder I'm using, H1000. As you can imagine, a 200 grain bullet going over 3,100 feet per second is deadly medicine. In the 7mm corner is one of the most popular 7mm right now. It's the 7mm PRC. Now I know a bunch of you are going to say, wait a minute, this isn't fair. You're comparing a 7 PRC to a much more powerful 300 Weatherby. Why aren't you using 300 PRC? Well, I just wanted to use real world examples. Don't worry, we're not going to shortcome the 7 PRC. I know that's probably a worry for some of you. But also, we're not just going to use 7 PRC. I am going to use 28 Nosler as well, just to see how they compare. Since we are doing a comparison, let's try to make this apples to apples as much as possible. What we're going to use is my 300 Weatherby rifle as kind of the blueprint. So this rifle has a 26-inch barrel. So you can see here, pretty long. The rifle with this scope comes in around 10 pounds. So we're going to look at recoil, just how manageable this gun is to shoot in both, obviously, my 300 Weatherby, but we're going to use the exact same specs for 7 PRC and 28 Nosler. Now let's just talk about the pros of getting a 30 caliber Magnum over a 7mm. And in a minute, I will obviously do the same for 7mm, why you should get one over a 30 caliber. Number one for 30 caliber, it's a jack of all trades. It can just do everything. So what I'm really saying is it's much more versatile than a 7mm. What I mean by this is the bullet selection is just almost unbeatable in 30 caliber. You can shoot from a 100 grain hammer bullet all the way up to a 250 grain Hornady A-tip. And hunting bullets, good hunting bullets, go all the way up to about 210 grain. So for example, you have this AccuBond long range at a 210 grain, and that's something you can't shoot in 7mm. You can't even shoot a 200 grain bullet in 7mm, let alone a hunting bullet, and that's that heavy. The other benefit a 30 caliber has over a 7mm is when you're shooting the same weight bullets, 30 caliber is more efficient and faster. Let's, in theory, say there was, obviously my 300 Weatherby, and then someone wildcatted a 7 300 Weatherby. If I was shooting this 168 grain TTSX and then wanted to shoot a 168 grain LRX in a 7 300 Weatherby, I'm going to get better velocities with this 168 grain. I'm also, here's another benefit, going to get better barrel life. It's not as small of a diameter, so again, more efficient. The last point I want to make on why you would choose a 30 caliber over a 7mm is bullet diameter. Potential wound destruction as far as elk hunting. You're wanting to, well, take out as much as possible inside an elk to make sure you have an ethical kill. And well, I personally think 30 caliber does a better job at that. Why do I say that? Well, just the diameter of the bullet. So we're using the same type of bullets. This is not a great visual example, but here's the 7mm on the left and the 30 caliber on the right. So basically, you're going to make a bigger wound channel. In theory, it has better killing potential. All right, let's talk why you would get a 7mm Magnum over a 30 caliber Magnum, or just pick 7mm over 30 caliber. First, what I would say its strongest suit is that the bullets are more efficient in 7mm. Now, what the heck does that mean? Well, 7mm and 30 caliber can shoot up to 180 grain bullets. The 180 grain bullets are much sleeker, higher BC, much more efficient in the air than a 180 grain 30 caliber bullet. You just can't get a 30 caliber bullet that's, say, a 168 grain that has a G7 over 300. There's just no way you can do that in 30 caliber. It's a bit more stubby. So yes, while 30 caliber is more efficient with velocity of the same weight bullet, it's much more efficient with, well, it being a sleeker bullet in 7mm. The next advantage 7mm has over 30 caliber is, well, recoil. Now, I haven't shown the cartridge comparisons yet, but spoiler, 300 Weatherby beats 7 PRC, but at what cost? Well, the 300 Weatherby is using about 12 to 15 more grains of powder, and I'm not going to spoil how much more recoil it has over 7 PRC, but it's a lot. And for a lot of people, that extra bit of ballistic advantage is probably not worth the added recoil and the extra powder you've got to use. Either way, if I'm comparing 7 PRC to 300 Weatherby or 28 Nosler to 300 Weatherby, both 7mm have less recoil. All right, let's take a look at our cartridge comparisons. We're going to remember to use the same weight rifle, the exact same bullet, and, well, pretty darn good velocities out of all the cartridges. 7 PRC with a 170 grain terminal ascent. We're going to get a muzzle velocity of 3,050 feet per second, 35 12 foot-pounds of energy. Now let's talk about energy. Older people will emphasize it more than it should, and then, newer generations disregard it completely. I'm kind of in the middle. I think there is a place for it, but it's not the end-all be-all. Let's take this to 300, 2736, 2827 foot-pounds to 600 yards. Bolts going 2,444 feet per second, 2255 foot-pounds. One thing I forgot to mention was we are going to be at 9,000 feet of elevation. This is MOA in drop when sighted in at 100. 9.42 MOA at 600. 10 mile per hour wind, 1.95 MOA in wind adjustment. Very good for, well, honestly, kind of a medium-sized Magnum cartridge. Let's see what the 300 Weatherby will do. Here's this personal hunting load that I've made. 200 grain terminal ascent at 3110 feet per second. Look at that energy. Almost 4,300 foot-pounds of energy. 300 yards, bullets going 2773 feet per second. And 3416 foot-pounds of energy. So almost 600 more foot-pounds of energy at 300 than a 7 PRC. At 600, bullets going 2461 feet per second. You have 2,689 foot-pounds. So over 400 more foot-pounds of energy. And in a drop, all the same elevation, 9.12 MOA versus 9.42, and a little bit worse wind drift, 2.03. But let's just call a spade. That's basically identical. So a slight advantage in drop and a bit more energy. However, let's address the numbers that are in parentheses. Yep, that is recoil. This is with an unbraked or unsuppressed 300 Weatherby. You're looking at 34 foot-pounds of recoil with a 10-pound rifle. 24 foot-pounds of recoil with a 10-pound rifle in a 7 PRC. That's a bit of a difference. Now, before I show you what the 28 Nosler ballistics are, I fully aware these little paper ballistics can be a little silly. You know, you need to get out in the real world and actually test it. And here's kind of the truth behind when you compare a 300 Weatherby to a 7 PRC with the exact same rifles, high quality components. Well, the 7 PRC is just going to be a more accurate cartridge. Does that mean the 300 Weatherby is a poorly, inherently not accurate? No, I've gotten great accuracy. It just means the 300 Weatherby is going to take a bit more work to get good accuracy, while the 7 PRC probably won't, especially in a high quality rifle. So out at 600 yards, if you're taking those longer shots, well, is the hit probability going to be a little better in a 7 PRC than a 300 Weatherby? Probably. The cartridge is just a little bit more accurate. And look, it's not just the 7 PRC that's a very accurate cartridge. I would even go far as to say the 7 Remington Magnum is a very inherently accurate cartridge as well. In fact, if I had to choose between the two in the same setup, I'd probably pick a 7 Rem Mag over a 7 PRC. Now, does this mean 30 calibers just aren't as accurate? Obviously, no. You know, you got the 308 Winchester, which is very accurate. And then you've got the world record smallest groups at 1,000 yards type cartridge, the 300 WSM. Now let's look at 28 Nosler. Obviously with the 170 grain terminal scent, 28 foot-pounds of recoil, so a bit less still than a 300 Weatherby. Muzzle velocity of 3,200, 3,866 foot-pounds of energy, 300 yards, 2876, 3,122 foot-pounds. At 600, bullets going 2574, so about 100 feet per second faster than both the 300 Weatherby and the 7 PRC. But the energy it doesn't match the 300 Weatherby, at least at 600 yards, but it's pretty darn close, you know, within 180 foot-pounds of each other. And of course, 28 Nosler is a flat speed demon. 8.42 MOA versus 9.12 and 9.42. So a whole MOA advantage over a 7 PRC. And it's going to have the best wind drift as well, 1.83. Well, this kind of solves everything, right? Just go with the 28 Nosler over any 30 caliber, right? Well, in a hunting rifle, man, I just have not had the best luck loading 28 Nosler. You know, for really high precision accuracy, I think it's hard to do in a lightweight hunting rifle for 28 Nosler. It's just a little too much, a little too overbore. Yes, I'm saying that while owning a 300 Weatherby. However, in the loading that I've done for 300 Weatherby and 28 Nosler, the 300 Weatherby has been way easier to get the accuracy I want. After looking at the numbers, there's obviously a big advantage with the 7mm as far as recoil. If you are recoil sensitive, a unbraked 30 caliber Magnum is definitely not for you. You know, shooting a 7mm Magnum is, well, much more recoil friendly. With that being said, well, we're not in the mid-90s anymore. And this makes my 300 Weatherby very easy to shoot.
Go ahead and chamber it.
And of course, a suppressor also helps with recoil. Not nearly as well, obviously, as a muzzle brake. Now, the popularity of suppressors, yeah, the whole recoil thing, I understand the argument, but I don't know. I certainly don't mind the recoil for my 300 Weatherby whatsoever.